We've never ever talked about the handles for this thing. Now, I did pick up some really nice green gecko lizard handles. I'm thinking that that's going to look really sharp on the front. No, just kidding, just kidding. That's what this trough is for all this time. What the trough is for is that I want part of this embossment to be the handles. Now the front here, I took this panel last night and I sanded it up to 400 grit everywhere except down this little trough. Mostly because it's easier for me to sand this whole thing as a big unit than as 4 individual drawers with edges on it and such. So I did that, even though we're going to be doing a little bit more sculpting on this later. What we're going to do is, if we take a look at one of the side panels, after I've applied the drawer fronts, we can basically close all the drawers and maybe use a clamp to just hold them in place while this is temporarily mounted. And when it's mounted, what I want to do is I want to actually take the rasp and I'm going to sculpt away part of this front here and here. I'm going to smooth this, round it down, and make it match up with the other one so it looks like it just flows across the sides. And these parts here are going to be rounded and flow around to the sides. So after we do the sculpting on this side here to do that matching, and this side here, then I'll simply have to take the 400 grit and just do it on this outside edge. Go up to 400 and on the other one. So now's the time to cut this front up and start doing the application to the fronts of the drawers. The drawers are actually sitting in here already, but what I need to do is we need to figure out where we're going to cut this horizontally, and then actually, because this groove here is going to become the handles for each one of the drawers, it needs to be shaped more. What we're going to do is we're actually going to cut this center section here out, and each one of these drawer fronts is going to be applied by taking a piece on this side, the left, the right, and then of course the middle piece. And each one of these is going to get a little bit more shaping in on this edge in order to create an integral handle. Now, in order to facilitate that, what I've done is I centered this panel where I need it in order to do the shaping to match up with the side panel that's sculpted on the edge here. And what I did is I applied a piece of blue tape. Now the piece of blue tape is just on the back, and what I did is I put it where I needed it here, and then I drew a line. And that line is just on the outside edge of this style for the bottom portion. The reason being is that when we cut all these pieces up, I want to know how to place them horizontally. Now, of course, there's going to be a pattern to follow, but I want to use that to help me guide it, at least use that for most of it. And then actually, in order to help with the placement of this, I'm going to place some blue tape over top of the drawer fronts so that when they get sliced, I can use the tape line to help me do the alignment. I mean, sure, there's a round corner here, but this round edge is, it's not a real crisp line. So by applying some tape to the fronts here, now when the blade cuts through this, it's going to be really easy to see exactly where this line is going to need to line up. We can use that along with some of the other cues. Now, I did this on a previous cabinet that I built for my master closet, actually. It had a progressive cove down the middle, so you need to get that really well lined up. In its case, this outside edge was a wide bevel, and I used the tape for that, and it made the alignment so much easier. And since in this case we don't have such a clean line, you have kind of fuzzy curves and such, plus it's going to be in 3 parts, I want to have as much help as I can get for doing the alignment. So at this point, what I need to do is I need to figure out where we're going to cut this horizontally to create the fronts that are going to be applied to the drawers. Obviously, the rails are going to give that away. But one thing that's a little different for this cabinet is that right now I have this sitting on the assembly table, so the front of this applied front is flush to the bottom of the cabinet. So this whole panel needs to slide down at least a little bit. This panel was made overly wide so that we could trim it down to whatever we needed after the installation. But I do want a little bit of this panel to stick out just a hair below this bottom part of the vanity. So the easiest way for me to do that is I'm just going to take some of the excess drawer stock that I had, and we're going to prop this thing up. That way this panel can slide down, and then we can use that for setting the marks. So all we're going to do is just take a look here and eyeball. I'd like it to be, if we were to cut this into thirds, I'd like it to be that 1/3 is up on it, and then the 2/3 is going to be below from this from the previous drawer. So let's just do that by eye. Right like that. And then up here, I would like to remove that top strip. Again, this strip is going to be, the piece that's remaining up here is going to be too wide, but we'll end up scribing that in after that's been installed so we can make it just match perfectly. It'll all get finished ahead of time, so then we can just simply tack it up. So So we'll just put a little bit of excess on the top here. So now we'll just take this to the table saw and do the cuts. So you see how we can reassemble this drawer. Now these are just some cardboard shims. Having two of these is going to simulate my kerf, so I can at least get the spacing pretty similar to what happened, you know, so everything will still line up with the sides, and it makes it very easy for me. This is actually going to be used in assembling them. We're going to take the fret saw, and I'm going to be cutting in on this inside edge here and cutting in on this inside edge here to create three parts. That middle part is going to be kind of turned into more of like a hump, so that there's room for fingers to go in on the side, and this portion here and here is going to be back cut to make basically room for a handle. What I'm going to want to do is basically cut back from this portion here. So this center portion I want to make like a hump, right? So for the most part I just want to take wherever this crease is and I'm going to cut backwards. Now I'm not going to cut with a straight saw, I'm going to use the fret saw for this so I can follow the curve. But since the top portion here and then the portion down here are both going to be beyond the edges of the drawer front, what I want is I want those to be really clean. So the fret saw isn't the cleanest cut when I'm, if I'm wiggling at all, but if I can make this one at least straight going down about, I don't know, a ½ inch and then coming up about a ½ inch, that'll be a really easy one for me to mate. Because then when I put these pieces together on this drawer front, the reason I only marked one reference line on the back of this applied front is because it'll be registered to this style, and then in the middle will be butted up to this portion, and then this one will be butted up. So in a way, the other side will be scooted over by two kerfs. So you'll see that more when we get there later, but for right now, basically, I just want to use the cross cut on here. So I'll cut down about a ½ inch, then I'll come up about a ½ inch, and then I'll use the fret saw to connect the two. Like that. So you can see nice and clean here, nice and clean here. This portion here is all going to be back cut away anyway when we do some of the shaping for this handle. So I got the top drawer ready. It was a little bit of an experiment to see how much I wanted to undercut, what I wanted to use to undercut, and a bunch of other things like that. So it took a little bit more time, but basically I've got it to where I like it. And what I did is I ended up using a ½ inch rabbiting bit to rabbit in about a ½ inch from here. I'm leaving a good 1/4 inch or 5/16 up here for the thickness because I wanted to have some strength. Plus also I'm going to be rounding this little part here just to get rid of that sharpness that's there. But I wanted to be enough room in there to get your fingers in. I mean, this is more room than you're going to need. So on this drawer, what I did, now this is the second drawer that I'm going to be doing. Now you can see that the front of it, because of the way that I sort of sculpted down, there's a bit of an angle on this side, and then this back part here was what I cut with the fret saw. So there's this pointy part. What I'm going to do is I take the fret saw to basically cut away a scoop of this to make a vertical portion that the bearing is going to be able to ride on when I run it through. Now, of course, you're running this thing through and you're doing end grain here, so you're going to want to use coping sled for that. So I've got this little coping sled. I'm using it with just a brass start pin that's on my table. I happen to have, some of this is left over, some of the suede is left over from my Moxon vise, so I've been putting that on top of this so that when this cinches down, it's not going to make any marks on the top. I didn't film it, but I probably should have, just to show you. You're going to want to use something like a coping sled for sure, right? Because you're doing a lot of end grain on the end of a board that's relatively long. I mean, it's just going to want to take off. So what I wanted to mention is that, of course, this board is too wide for this coping sled by a long shot. Here's the lateral holder here, and then of course there's the aluminum bar. So the temptation would be, well, I'll just run just this one, but that's all it's going to take. So what I did for this is I simply removed this aluminum bar here. I mean, there's only a couple screws. It takes no time at all to take this bar off. And then what I could do is on the drawer that was up here, it could lock itself up against this post, and then this could still squeeze it. So this would lock up against it, and this would squeeze it on this side here, so it was actually still captured and everything. And of course these are down, and once this is down, this is almost optional. And that's actually what I did for this one. This one here is still too wide, even if I use the post as a lateral holder, because this won't go back out far enough. So what I did is I just lifted this up so that it was kind of squeezing on the end. It wasn't pushing in on the side, but it was at least squeezing. And then these, of course, were cinched down. So no matter what, make sure you use a coping sled, though, for safety on something like this. So what I'm going to do at this point is I'm going to start shaping this little opening here. Now, this kind of rough slope that goes down, that's part of the RAS and part of the routing that I did originally way back, I don't know, what, episode 3 or something like that. The groove that we have here, that's the rabbet that I just finished putting in earlier. This is just because I didn't have it set to the full thickness, but that's okay. I just give this a little bit of a push and it'll pretty much break right off. When I do the sanding in here, it'll be very easy to give it a quick run here and it cleans that right up, no problem. So now what I want to do is I want to smooth this little ridge that we have here. I want to smooth that down so that it kind of goes cleanly into this edge to create this as a handle. The easiest way to do that is to use one of these drill-based sanding systems, and that's what we're going to do here. The 80 will do some nice shaping. I have this with an interface pad so that it'll smooth this more than it will if I had it directly on the stiffer pad. I would get more faceting. With the round, it's easier to give a little bit of a press, and it kind of conforms and smooths all this together. So we have 80 here. I'm going to bring it up to 120, 220, and then 320 for the final. And all you do is just put this in a Jacob chuck and go. See how it's been sort of finessed so that it doesn't look quite so abrupt or anything like that. Let me go and finish these and then we'll get to doing the middles. So I've gone through all the drawers and I've done all the sanding and shaping for these handles, so I'm happy with those, but now we need to turn our attention to the middle. Just to give you an idea, it took me about 40 minutes to do the 4 drawers for doing this rounding. It goes very quickly once you get going, especially when you're not tethered to the camera. Now I need to turn my attention to this, because when I go to connect this together, of course, now my fingers don't make it into that handle anymore because there's just too much meat here. So what I'm going to want to do is I'm going to want to take the fret saw and scoop a good shallow part here, and then scoop another big shallow part here, and then go and do some sanding to smooth it out and get it down to size. And that's going to give a lot more room for the hands to go in. So it'll just be a little bit of fret saw work there. Now there is one thing that's worth pointing out, is that when I did the cuts for these, I did them with the Japanese saw at the top, and then after that I continued on with the fret saw. Now there are some places, like there's a little bit of a place here, where the material lines up, but you can see that there's a gap. You may not be able to catch this on the camera, but there's a little gap line right there, even though I'm pressing it. The reason being is that this kerf for the Japanese saw is cut right up to the start of this curve here. The rest of the way was done with the fret saw. The fret saw has a thinner kerf. So actually there's a thinner kerf between this stock here and that stock there. So because of that, it's impeding it from actually closing up. Now after I do the scooping, all you have to do is, after you do all the shaping and when you go to put it together, is just take a little chisel, knock off that one part that's in the way. It won't really matter if there's a small gap there, because you're actually opening it up to a larger gap. And it makes it look kind of good. It looks like a little recess in there. So that's how we'll get these to line up flush. And then the drawers, when they get assembled together, will look all nice and clean, and you won't see any of the cuts. So let me go and start shaping these. hands can get in there just fine. This could be lower just a little bit, but by the time I go and do this side here, I might just take the 80 grit and kind of smooth over the hump to take it a little bit lower in the middle. But right now, even at this goofy angle I'm at, my fingers go in there just fine. This one does have the problems with the 2 different kerf sizes, so I'll be fixing that a little later. Mostly I'm just going to take this piece here right off and just let it mate right up to it. Alright, well I'm going to go through all the rest of these and we'll catch you on the other side. So after trimming some of these edges that were over here to make them meet up really nicely, what I did is I kind of just clamped it down here onto the MFT table so that this is representing what it's going to look like when it's put up onto the front of the drawers. Of course the kerf isn't there, but what I wanted to do is finesse these edges to make them a little bit closer, so a little bit of chisel work over here and there, and then hitting it again with the drill pad. They're not perfect yet in the sense that they're not as smooth here as I'd like, but those are going to be easier to do after they're glued on, because then I can just round that corner very easily with a file. So that'll be, of course, after they're already mounted onto the drawers. But otherwise, this was a great way to just sort of verify everything was going to flow correctly, and then make these match up, where there was a couple places where when I was doing the sculpting on the drawers after they had been cut, I was a little bit more aggressive on one side than the other. So this evened them all out. So at this point, what I want to do is we need to strengthen these handles, otherwise they're not going to last very long.